I'm not sure if I've ever heard of a game revived the way Live Alive rhymes with Dive a Dive has been, and I am here for it. The first in the inevitable wave of HD 2D remakes is here, and it's a doozy. A game with a development team in the early stages of illustrious careers and the inspiration it has had on several more widely known games. The number of unique settings and scenarios and the prospect of an interwoven narrative linking these disparate times together is what got me intrigued for this game. Add in the grid turn-based battle system, twists on the gameplay formula for each area. I truly can't believe I hadn't heard of this game before the remake announcement, and I'm so glad they brought it to us now. Square Enix may have made some questionable decisions recently, but I'm definitely here ready to celebrate a great one as Live Alive comes to the West for the first time. Live Alive is a 1994 JRPG developed and published by Square for the SNES. The game had two notable debuts in prominent roles for the game's director, Takashi Tokita, and the game's composer, Yoko Shimomura. Live Alive was Takashi Tokida's game directorial debut, but he would afterwards serve as the director for Chrono Trigger, Parasite Eve, and has worked on pretty much everything involving Final Fantasy IV under the sun. Yoko Shimomura was more established than Tokita at this time, but this was her first project at Square after leaving Capcom. Since Live Alive, Yoko Shimomura is likely most notable for composing Kingdom Hearts and will be returning to orchestrate and arrange the updated soundtrack for Live Alive. Despite the pedigree, the game received a cooler than expected reception, scoring only a 29 out of 40 from Famitsu and selling around 270,000 units. An international release never materialized, but over time the game has reached cult classic status. In addition to influencing later Tokita works such as Chrono Trigger, some modern games, including the first HD 2D game, Octopath Traveler, explore similar ideas and were likely influenced by Live Alive. It makes sense then that Square Enix would use the HD 2D system to bring the game to life for modern players. The game is again developed by Square Enix, but this time Nintendo is handling overseas publishing of the game. The game will launch for the Nintendo Switch on July 22, 2022, and currently has a demo with carryover to the main game. And thus one journey ends and another begins. At the beginning of the game, you select between 7 different scenarios, each with its own story and main character across disparate time periods. There is prehistory, where you play as a young tribal member. You can name the characters whatever you want, so have fun with that. In an ancient era where language wasn't even invented yet. There is Imperial China, where you play as a master of a particular style of kung fu looking for a disciple to pass down their art to. There is the Twilight of Edo, Japan, where you play as a shinobi tasked with infiltrating a castle in whatever method they wish to strike against an enemy. There is a Wild West scenario where you play as a cowboy defending a town against a group of outlaws. There is a modern present-day scenario where you play as a wrestler trying to reach the top and become the strongest in the world. There is a near-future scenario where our main character has telepathy and fights back against the growing dystopian elements of society. Finally, among the initial playable scenarios, we have the space scenario, or the far future, where you play as a robot trying to help secure the ship on its journey through space along with the crew. There are 2 other scenarios that come in the game, the first being the medieval chapter where you are a knight defending against evil. You cannot do this path first, or until you finish all the other routes first. I'm not sure based on what I've read. And it has revelations that lead into the 9th scenario when you bring everyone together to defeat the overarching foe. This system definitely has its benefits and drawbacks, but I find myself intrigued because of the wide differences between each of the scenarios. The stories are very different and each of them have their own characters that inhabit your party with you and deal with unique issues. This is reflected in the gameplay, but I'll get to that later. I also think that while some of the paths explore ideas other RPGs have done in the past, others are fun new ideas that could subvert typical genre tropes and present a different sort of story for us as players. I look forward to getting to know the characters in the game and figuring out how these stories across time and space fit together into a wider narrative. I'm not expecting galaxy brain thinking and exceptional writing, but I am very much hoping for an entertaining ride and some attachment to the characters and their individual stories. I alluded to the differences in gameplay earlier, and that is found in a lot of unique mechanics found throughout the game. The first one I was presented with in the demo was in the shinobi scenario. As you are confronting this castle full of enemies, you have a couple ways to tackle it. This choice is made possible by the ability you gain right at the start that allows you to hide from enemies. While you can still go through and attack and slaughter every enemy in the castle, this invisibility power allows you to be judicious in who you take on, or even bypass fighting altogether if you so wish. Several of the other scenarios have similar mechanics that change up your gameplay style and choices. Another way of varying up gameplay comes from the Imperial China scenario, where you are training disciples and you get to pick throughout a training session period how you develop your 3 disciples. It is clear to me that the developers put in a lot of effort into making each path unique. That being said, if you're not feeling a mechanic or a gameplay style, it could make those gameplay sections a slog to get through. While that is a slight concern, it also seems that each scenario doesn't overstay its welcome, as the game itself is on the shorter side for an RPG in this day and age, so that should alleviate some worries. I'm not sure how deep the differences throughout the game go, but I'm excited to see how it all turns out, and for the opportunity to play with different characters that also feel different in gameplay as well. Combat, though, seems to be pretty uniform across the board, but with each character possessing different abilities and varied enemies they have to face. The battlefield is set in a grid and you get to move around it, positioning yourself and whatever allies you have to pull off attacks. Some require you to be right next to an enemy, and some you need distance. Some may push an enemy away or allow you to retreat after performing the attack. Turns are determined by a charge meter that allows you to act when it reaches a certain level, and likewise for your enemies, so make sure to pay attention as you're moving about. Unsurprisingly, for the early battles I did in the demo, the strategic element was minimal, but I imagine that as battles get more challenging, the grid placement is going to become essential to keep track of. Enemies and allies can also be resistant or vulnerable to certain types of attacks, and there are a lot of attack types. I really am looking forward to seeing how this system develops and expands upon what I have seen so far, because I've been having fun with it and I see a lot of potential in the system. Presentation-wise, the game is already off to a great start. The environments are absolutely gorgeous and the design's solid as well. One of the interesting things about this game is that each era has its own character designer that worked on it, which certainly helped with creating distinct character looks. It also seems that the overall art direction was able to take these various styles and work them so that all of the characters do seem like they could fit into the same world overall, while being extremely different from one another, and the environment around the characters fit as well. It's an impressive feat, and I applaud them for doing it back in 1994 and maintaining it for the remake. Musically, the game has a strong legacy already, with numerous tracks cited among Yoko Shimomura's best work, and the Megalomania track in particular having direct inspiration for Toby Fox's Undertale soundtrack. Having listened to the original soundtrack and heard some of the new tracks, I think they've done a great job recreating the energy and thought behind the music. It's an absolute classic soundtrack, and the addition of more instruments and a chance to make an even richer sound is one I think they are taking full advantage of. The UI and UX of the game is clean and understandable, but I do think that there are certain updates to the game that could have been added to aid in the experience. Some early chapters of the game adopt a throw them in the deep end mentality, which could cause frustration for those trying to figure out what to do or where to go from that beginning section. I encourage those who get frustrated to consult guides. There are plenty from the original game and would likely still be useful for the remake. Finally, there is voice acting added for the game that, as far as I can tell, is decent. Nothing that makes me worry about the final product, certainly, but it is still too early to tell. At least on the presentation side of things, the game seems fantastic. The strengths of the original are carried over into the remake, and other areas are enhanced by the general advancement of video games. Having a classic like Live Alive revived like this is a fantastic opportunity, and I do not plan to miss out on it. The game has some intriguing combat, great visuals, an earworm of a soundtrack, and story ideas that I'm looking forward to seeing come together. While my expectations are somewhat tempered in anticipation, I am still overall very much hyped to get the chance to play a game that served as an inspiration for some other excellent games. If you are planning on joining me in this journey, feel free to let me know in the comments along with your thoughts on what other remakes you'd like done in this style. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you have not already. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, and happy gaming.